Welcome to another episode of the Heat Check podcast. I'm Anthony Chang of the Miami Herald. And with me this week, I have Barry the Buzz Jackson. Barry, how are you?
Anthony, it's so good to be with you, filling in for our sports editor, John Devine. Certainly a lot to talk about after, oh my goodness, what a debacle of a playoff series.
Yeah, you could say that. Let's start with that. Let's start with that since we haven't spoken since that series. Most lopsided series in NBA playoff history, got outscored by 122 points by the Cavaliers. The Heat's two worst playoff losses in franchise history in games three and four. We thought game three was bad, and then game four was even worse. Um, Look, I don't think any of us really expected Heat to win that series, right? I mean, they were the eight seed, they were 10th place in the East, facing the best team in the Eastern Conference, a team that could win the NBA championship. But to lose like that and be so one-sided, what was most disappointing to you from that series, Barry?
Just how uncompetitive they were and just that they let go of the rope. And I don't know if it was lack of effort, Anthony. I think it was just being so dispirited. This team had mental toughness in some regards, but lacked it in others. You have to give them credit for rebounding from the 10-game losing streak, having a 6-game winning streak, rebounding from the late 6 point deficit in Atlanta, and being able to come out and win the playing game. So you give them credit for that. But generally, this was not a team with a lot of mental toughness. They wilted too often. If something went wrong, they unraveled. Obviously, as everyone knows, the most blown leads and losses of any team this season. And it seemed like both in game three and game four, the moment something bad happened where they started
Yeah.
missing shots or they had defensive breakdowns or more of the mindless turnovers that we saw incessantly over the last 3 months, they just collapsed and unraveled. It broke their spirit. And to see a Heat team whose spirit was repeatedly broken, I don't want to use the word quit, even though it looked like that at times, and Barkley said that, but to see that to me was most disappointing. And also, I would say the other big disappointment for me was Wiggins. Now, whether the ankle was bothering him or not, we'll never know because he refused to speak to us yesterday. But basically, he had no impact on winning at all since the trade. He missed a lot of games due to injury. The talent does not equal the production. 3 for 10 shooting in games two and three, opened 0 for 5 in game four, finished
Mhm.
with 10, 10, and 12 points in those last 3 games. He's almost invisible. For a number one overall pick, there needs to be more significant, tangible, substantial impact on winning than Wiggins delivers, especially at a salary of 26 million that's going to mushroom to 30 million in 26, 27 if he picks up that option. So those were the big disappointments for me. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, to go off your Wiggins point, third and fourth pace, third and fourth highest paid player on the roster. Basically, fourth, Terry Rozier didn't play in the series. He was injured, he was out of the rotation, and then Wiggins really not making an impact. You just can't afford it. I mean, how could you compete with that, right? So yeah, that's a big one. I think it was. I mean, we kind of already knew this, but just crystallized it. They are so far away from contending for a championship. That became very, very clear just how far they are, which is discouraging, obviously. And just their struggles. It's just there's a big picture one, but I have it here. They finished 12 and 34 this season against teams with a 500 record or better. That's
And
awful.
6 and 18 at home against playoff teams, a number that I've cited. And just to me, the volume of uncompetitive home games they've played,
Yeah.
and you and
Even
I have
against
talked
bad
about this
teams, even against
off air.
Utah,
Yes,
Portland's bad teams. And Portland wasn't
exactly.
terrible, but
Blowout
at
loss
that
to
point,
Utah
yeah.
in the middle of the
Yeah.
Jimmy debacle, 136 to 130 to 100 loss, 36 point loss to Utah at home during the
Yeah.
middle of the whole Jimmy
Lose to
Butler chaos. But
Charlotte. Yeah.
exactly. But to me, when you have been blown out 10 times at home and had more than 15 double digit losses at home since the start of the 2024 calendar year, that should tell you that something is flawed with this roster. This
Yeah.
is not a nucleus to necessarily build around when you are repeatedly annihilated at home. That's why I called for a blow up last off season. Uh, and why I think that they can't just make moves around the edges this offseason, think that minor tinkering is going to significantly improve the team.
Did your opinion change on Bam and Tyler from watching that series, or is that, a four-game sample against the best team in the East, maybe the best team in the NBA? Is that unfair?
I don't want to blame Bam and Tyler because they are what they are. You can't blame them for being paid the type of money they're being paid. At the same time, it's clear that the Heat needs a one
Yep.
with Bam and Tyler in whatever order, 1A, 1B, 1C, right? But they can't probably be the best player on a championship team. And again, that's not an insult toward them. Tyler had a terrific season, obviously shot the 1 for 10 in game 4, but that should not tarnish what was a very good season for him. He was durable, he was productive, 17th in the league in scoring, 33rd in the league in assists, shot 37.5 on threes, played nearly every game, rescued them in the play-in with 2 30-point games. And then obviously Bam did come around offensively after the slow start. And people who are expecting Bam to be a 25-18 game every night, it should be abundantly clear he's not
It's
going
not
to
going to
be
happen.
that. But the
Yeah.
issue that creates would be this. With Hero, he's at an affordable 31 and 33 million the next 2 years. If he asks for 50 million a year in the extension, and he doesn't necessarily have to give him that, they can give him something less. Then the question becomes, can you afford a payroll where Bam and Tyler are both at 50 million, knowing that you need another star at 50 million to be competitive? And that then limits the rest of the roster, if you want to stay under the tax, to 30 to 50 million, depending on what year it is. Tax, obviously, threshold's been going up every
Right.
year. Cap's been going up about 10 million every year with the new TV deal. So that is the conundrum you face. Did the playoff series change your perception on those two at all?
No, because I always thought they needed a number one, right? I mean, that just confirmed it. It's kind of like the other stuff with the Heat. Like the series, maybe again, we didn't expect to go like this, but it kind of confirmed what we all thought, right? They're far away from contending for a championship. Bam and Tyler are good players, right? We've seen them, we've seen Bam for sure be the second, third best player on a team that made it to the NBA Finals, right? We've seen that. Can he be the best player on a team that makes it to the NBA Finals? No, I think that's clear. Tyler Hero, the same thing. Tyler's a very skilled offensive player. He said it during exit interviews, which we'll get to in a few minutes, but he needs to work on closing games. That it's not as easy as some people made it seem. We could guess that he's referring to Jimmy Butler, right? So they need help. And to your point of building around Bam and Tyler, you could build around them. But like you said, can you build around two guys making $50 million, combine $100 million in salary, but you need a better player than them still? That is the question. That's tough because it's not like you need, oh, you just need a third star, a third one. No, you need a better player than both of them, really, to contend for a championship. So that is going to be the big question. I think Tyler had a really good season, very encouraged, right? He's still young. I think he'll still improve. Defensively, we saw it this series, and we know it. He's not a great defensive player. He's limited on that end, and it's hard. It's hard to win when if one of your best guys is a target on the defensive end. So again, they're gonna have to get a two. They have to get more two-way players on this team, which has been a
Yes.
problem now for a few years, where there's so many lineups where okay, you get defensive guys out there, but then you can't score. You got shooters out there that could score, but then you can't defend. They need two-way players. I think that was the hope with Wiggins, right? He's a two-way player. Eric Spoelstra's called him a really good two-way player. He just wasn't assertive enough offensively, whether it was the injuries or whatever. We don't know, like you said. But they need more two-way guys to really take this team to another level.
And look how little they got from players making close to a combined 70 million. Duncan Robinson wasn't even in the
Yeah,
rotation in the final game. Unfortunately for Duncan, who's a good guy and a good player, he's turned into a guy who, during his peak years, when he got the 5 year, $90 million contract, he was a 3 good out of every 4 game guy. Now he's 1 good out of every 3. And that's not all his fault because his lack of minutes certainly is a factor. He can't get rhythm as a shooter. So obviously the outlay for him this year was 18 million, would be 19 million next year if they keep him. Rozier at 24 million gave you nothing this year. We've never seen a player in his 20s regress from a very good player, cusp of an all-star, to one of the worst point guards in the league this year, which is what he
yeah.
was statistically, both from a shooting standpoint, 29% on threes, and from a turnover standpoint, just bad decision standpoint. And then the rest of that 70 million was Wiggins, who gave you nothing at all impactful or tangible in this playoff series and gave you next to nothing since his acquisition, except for the big 41 point explosion on the Sunday afternoon against Charlotte a few weeks ago. So you can't allocate that much of your payroll to players who are not helping you. And it's mystifying with Rozier. To me, it's a little puzzling with Duncan because we know the guy who set NBA 3-point records
Hmm.
did things that no one other than Steph Curry had ever done early this century. We know that guy's still in there. We just don't see enough of that guy anymore. Now, I know some people, I want your view on this. I know some people are saying you're not just one star away, so what's the point of a star? But to me, with a 5-player team, a 15-man roster, even though you're more than one player away, you have to get the high talent guy
Yeah.
first and then rely on your scouting staff, Adam Simon, Chet Cameron, whatever level of involvement he still has, and everyone else to find you more Struces and Vincents and Caleb Martins at the minimum and build the team around a star, and then ideally Bam and Hero if they're still here, and then
Yeah.
a bunch of minimums, counting on your scouting staff to find cheap talent like they did with Max and Gabe before obviously they outpriced themselves. To me, that's the best and easiest course to go for this reason. You're never going to be in a position like Cleveland where you get top 6 picks to add Garland and Mobley, or Boston with obviously Jaylen Brown and Tatum, because we know they're against tanking. So you're never
Hmm.
going to get enough high volume picks to build your team as a homegrown team through high lottery picks. So to me, trade is the only solution and just rely on your scouting staff to fill out the roster. How would your approach be going forward?
No, I agree with you. I think that's the most realistic path for this team with the way they operate. It's just interesting because I agree, while I agree with that, best player in franchise history was drafted, right? And I know that was a year they was one of the worst
A
years in
top
franchise
five
history.
pick?
Top five pick, one of the few times they've had that. Bam and Tyler were drafted. The only reason they're even competitive at this point is because they drafted those two guys and they hit on those picks, right? So it would help, I think, and I know this team doesn't want to hear this and they'll never do this intentionally. It would help probably to get a lottery pick and to get some talent on this roster. But yeah, the most realistic way is to trade for a star, but it has to be the right star, right? That's the thing. It can't just be you can't act out of desperation and trade for. And I'm not saying KD wouldn't help the team. He would obviously, but are you ready to win right now with a 37-year-old Kevin Durant? Is that going to propel you to title contender? Are you ready to give away two, three picks for Kevin Durant? Is this team in that position? Maybe with Jimmy. If you guys still had Jimmy, maybe you could do that because you would then really be a title contender. But yeah, I think they have to be patient. Fans don't want to hear that. I know this team really isn't that patient. They always want to go for it now. But they're going to have expiring contracts next year, right? And Duncan and Terry, if they're still here next offseason, um, picks are going to start opening up in the coming years to trade. In 2026, I know they're not set to have max space at this point, but they're going to be close to maybe opening max space and they have a good amount of cap space that offseason. So they're going to have more flexibility moving forward. My thing would be just don't give away that flexibility for in a desperation move just to become the 5 seed in the East. That would be a mistake, in my
Right. I
opinion.
can see that argument with Durant because obviously his advanced age, even though he's still a really good player, they're not going to give up the farm for Durant. I think there's a certain level they would get to in terms of assets, but they're not trading all of their future first
Hmm.
and where and whatever else for Durant. There's a certain level to which they
Right.
would go. I don't know precisely what that level is, but I know it's not the type of level
Sure.
that it would be for a 25-year-old
Okay.
superstar.
Right.
But to me, you do it if the right star emerges. Obviously, with Giannis, it's a no-brainer. You offer Bam and 3 number 1s, and you could offer as many as 3 if you do it on draft night or a little before, and whatever else Milwaukee wants. With Morant, obviously, I don't think he would offer Bam
No.
because obviously he's declined somewhat in terms of turnovers. The volume of
Right.
turnovers
That's the
higher.
thing.
There's always
Is
the
Ja
off
the
ball
right
issues.
star? Right. Like
Yes,
that. There's a question there. Maybe he's obviously very talented, but is he the right guy? So it has to be.
right.
It has to be for the right guy. Zion is another one that's come
Yeah, I
up,
was going
right?
to say that you mentioned
Yeah.
Zion off air to me, and that's an interesting name. He hasn't played 30 games in 4 of the 6 years, so that would make you say no, don't do it. They've had enough injury issues. But to me, the only reason you would possibly do Zion would be if you get him on such a bargain
Yes.
deal where you're just giving up players you have no particular use for, maybe one first round pick. Then maybe it's worth the risk, but you
Yeah.
go in knowing the likelihood is he's going to miss a lot of games.
Yeah. That's the yeah. Right. So is that you know the expectation probably isn't for that to immediately lift you to title contender status. And if we're looking for a guy that's better than Bam and Tyler, I don't know if Zion is that guy, right? I
He hasn't
mean,
consistently been
he
because of
has
injuries.
the
We've seen
upside.
snippets. We've seen
Yeah,
snippets of those 27 point, 15 rebound games. Occasionally, we see the
right.
glimpses that people thought he would be a transformational player, but you haven't seen enough of it. There's always inevitably a star who will
Always.
surprise us, who will ask out. But with Minnesota advancing, I don't think it's
Yeah.
going to be a random wolf. It's not going to be Anthony Edwards, I wouldn't think. So look for the teams that exit early in the playoff, especially in the Western
Luca?
Conference. See who could get impatient. Who? I missed
Luca? Luca?
it. That'd be funny. Well, he says he's happy. He said after last night he's
Yeah, we'll
happy.
see.
So
We'll
we'll
see. No,
see.
that's always been a name that's been connected to the Heat, right? I know Heat fans dream of getting Luca. We'll see about that. But yeah, I agree. And look, if it doesn't happen this offseason, we saw what happened with Jimmy this season, right? In the middle of the season. Sometimes stars become available in the middle of the season. And if they have expiring contracts and Terry and Duncan, they have a couple picks they could trade. They have other, young pieces. Maybe the pick, Khalil Wares, and obviously has some value. He's a 7-footer who's 21 and has shown a lot of upside. They're gonna have the 20th pick this year. Whoever they get with that pick, who knows? They're gonna have some pieces they can throw in deals. Maybe it happens in the middle of the season. So
Yeah,
I just wouldn't act out of desperation. It might end up being that this next year turns into a quote unquote transition year, right? And you kind
yeah.
of see what happens in 2026 offseason. I know Barry, you don't see it that way. You think and the way the Heat operate, like they're gonna push for it this offseason. I'm sure they will. I just how much of it is in their control? It's
That's an
not.
excellent point.
That's
They
the
are
problem.
so reliant on
Yes.
other teams to help them because at the moment they cannot use their full mid-level exception.
No.
If they renounce Davion Mitchell, then they could use the full 14 million cap exception for teams that are not tax teams. But they also, you would think, give a qualifying offer to Mitchell. We've been told that that is likely. So that will be an $8.7 million hit on your cap. That would put you about 11 million under the first apron, which would mean that you would not be able to go out and use exception money. So the only way at the moment, if they want to keep Davion Mitchell to improve, is through trades. And with
Yeah.
trades, you need the other team to cooperate and you need the other team to have interest in the assets that you're offering. So they are almost now completely at the mercy of other teams, especially because they made the playoffs. They don't have the 11th pick, where the odds of getting a good player were much higher than they are at 20, which is the Golden State pick, which they have this offseason. So you're right. Worst case scenario is a player who they want doesn't become available, or a player who they want becomes available, but the team that's trading him picks another offer instead of the
Which
Heat's,
we've
and then
seen
you're
many
stuck with
times
this group.
in recent
And
years. Yeah.
then your only way you improve with this group next year is if, to me, if Jovic and Ware
Yeah.
take big steps. You can say, yeah, maybe Jaquez, but I think we know there's a ceiling there. So that, I think, would be the only path to being a little bit better next year. If Ware and Jovic go from pretty good NBA players to very good NBA players, then maybe you get to a 6th seed, a 7th seed. The concern with next year would be this, though. If Embiid's latest knee procedure suddenly makes him healthy again, and if Paul George drinks from the fountain of youth and Maxi's healthy, then you would think the Sixers would supplant the Heat as the 8th seed. I don't know what other top 7 teams are falling, except maybe Milwaukee. Maybe
Right.
Milwaukee,
Maybe
if they
Milwaukee.
trade Giannis and with
Yeah.
Lillard out next year. So you're going to be battling again, in all likelihood, in the play-in next year with this roster, even if Ware and Jovic take a jump. The good news is you do have your first-round pick next year.
Yes.
So they could be in a spot where they desperately want to improve this offseason, but still fail to because they need help from other teams to do it, unless they get so lucky with the 20th overall pick, which rarely, if ever, produces a franchise player.
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say that the fact they have their pick is big next year because
Right.
it gives them the option of, okay, we're gonna try to compete, but if we don't, we're gonna get a lottery pick, right? But they have until 2027 to figure it out because then again we deal with the same issue of you don't make the playoffs in 2027, then you have an unprotected pick going to Charlotte
Because of
for
Rozier.
Terry
Now, you
Rozier in
were right on
2028.
Rozier. You told me at the time that you wouldn't have given up a first round pick, with all
Yeah,
due respect to Rozier. I said I understood the deal at the time because I thought we were getting, when I say we, I thought the Heat were getting the 24 point a game scorer who had
sure.
been good defensively, cusp of an all star, but they got nothing like that. So it was a
Yeah.
debacle. It was a disaster. But I'm the last person to rip the Heat for that because I was one of several media people, unlike you, who said it was a deal that made sense at the time. But you know the lesson learned? Here's the lesson learned. And I've told you this off air.
Yeah.
First round picks are so precious. They are so valuable. You cannot trade them for non All Stars. And you wonder if the Knicks now have a little buyer's remorse trading 5 of them for Mikal
Mikal
Bridges.
Bridges.
Good
Yeah.
player, not a great player.
Yeah. And even him, I mean, I can see one, two first round picks. He's an all-star fringe, all-star player. Yeah, and Terry at the time, I understood. I mean, I didn't think Terry was gonna be like this. I thought he would help them. Especially with Jimmy. You're fourth best, you're just asking him to be the fourth best player on the team, right? Behind Bam, Jimmy, and Tyler. That's a good role for him. But yeah, it's been an unfortunate situation for him from the neck injury to this season's struggles. Yeah, I think the fact they have their pick gives them, as much as I think the 11th lottery seed would have helped them this year, I think it gives them the option next year that they don't have to be desperate. There's no reason. Of course, you want to win, you want to put the best team out there, but you don't have to be desperate. You don't have to act out of desperation. You're going to have your pick, you wait for the right guy to become available, and you try to land them. But there's, like you said, they need others' cooperation. They need another team to like what the Heat are offering. They need the right star to become available. Um, that there's a lot of factors at play here that make it very difficult to predict what exactly is going to happen. We know
Yeah,
that they're not interested in a rebuild. We know that.
right.
Tyler and Bam said yesterday even, we want to win. We got to make moves this offseason to get better. They don't want to take steps back. But again, like you said, they might not have an option at this point.
Well,
And
I have something I want to bring up on that
yeah,
topic. In theory, I agree with your principle of you can't act out of desperation. You can't give up like all your future number
yeah,
ones and Jovic and Ware for Durant, who's 36. But I want to tell you something that's very worrisome to me. You have 12 players under contract. Let's say they find no trades that they can make this offseason to improve them. We know they have no free agent spending money other than minimum deals, unless they clear out Mitchell. Then they can use a little bit of their taxpayer mid level or a small portion of
yeah.
their non taxpayer mid level. But let's say they can't do anything with the roster this summer. What's it going to look like next year when you bring back this team? When you've had Bam saying there will be changes, when you have Tyler saying there needs to be changes, when you have a roster that has no confidence in itself, they get so dispirited when anything goes wrong. They have a penchant for unraveling and being blown out of games. They lost 10 in a row. How can you bring this team back from a mental standpoint when they are
Sure.
not strong enough mentally? To me, it would be a recipe for disaster. And again, they can't necessarily control all of this because if no one wants their assets and there's no player in the trade market that they want or is a good fit for trade wise, then they're stuck. But just from a mental standpoint, how can you bring back this roster knowing they have a history of melting and wilting and unraveling late in games? To me, it'd be a recipe for disaster, and you would have every reason to think the same outcome next year would happen as this year, even if they have that training camp together.
Yeah,
No, I mean, is that you think a valid consideration?
You're underestimating what could happen in a full training camp, Barry. But
That's funny. And Drew Smith coming back. How
and Drew
about
Smith
that?
returning. Yes, exactly. No, you have a very good point. I guess my point is if that happens, it happens. Like very likely you're not winning a title next year, no matter what happens, unless you luck into some mega superstar and get Giannis without giving up Bam or Tyler, which is not happening, right? So if that happens and you need to wait a few more months or you need to wait a season before getting the guy you need to take this team to the next level, then you have to deal with it.
Yeah,
It's a really tough
here's the one
position
problem
they're
with that.
in.
Because they don't want to go all in on tanking, and we understand why they
Yeah.
don't. They don't believe it generally works. It's obviously worked for a few teams, hasn't worked for Philly, hasn't worked for some others. But because of that, you'd be suffering through what could be, to me, another 35 and 47
Yeah.
type season. But you'd be doing it without a ton of first round draft inventory. You would
Right.
have your own first round pick next year. But other than that, you wouldn't have
You have
another
two
first
picks to
round pick
trade.
until 2030.
Right.
Exactly. So
Right.
if you're going to suffer through a 35 win season next year,
Yeah.
could the case be made then to trade some of your assets for first round picks? I don't know what would get a first round pick other than Ware, Bam, Hero, but if they're going to go in knowing that they don't have a chance to win much of anything next year, even 40, 45 games, then you're going through kind of an unintentional tank
It's
mini rebuild
unproductive. It's
without draft
unproductive.
assets
Yeah,
or with
it's an
very few
unproductive
draft
year.
assets.
Yeah. I agree with you. The thing is this team's not going to do it, but I think it would benefit from a 1 year reset. It's not a tank of 5 years, 4 years. And I'm not saying the tank, but 1 year, even just this year, if you would have gotten a lottery pick this year, maybe you get luck out and you get a top four pick. They had a what, a 9% chance? That's
Yeah.
not nothing. That's sometimes all it takes. All of a sudden you get a top five pick and you get that player you need. A young player on a rookie contract, very valuable. Maybe he helps, obviously helps you on the court. Maybe he's a trade chip. They kind of need that 1 year. I agree that having 38 wins next year and competing for the play-in and then losing in the first round again, that's not productive. I don't know how
No.
that could be productive, but I don't know what the alternative is if they can't get they're probably not gonna have enough for Giannis, right? I think we both would agree on that. Most likely, if the market is what we think it's gonna be, if Giannis becomes available, they're probably not gonna have enough. Most likely.
Right. With Houston having four first
Yeah.
round tradable picks, San Antonio having five, OKC having 10. If any of those teams get involved, then the Heat is screwed basically because
Yeah.
then Bam and three number ones and a couple of young players would not be enough. If OKC were to offer, I don't know, Holmgren or Jalen Williams or both, and six of their first rounders, right? Or if Houston offers Sengun or one of their others and five first rounders,
Yeah.
or if New Orleans puts together a package with Castle and others and four first rounders, then the Heat can't compete, even though a BAM offer with two or three firsts and
Would be good.
whatever other young players they
Yeah.
want would be a good offer. It's just that other teams have even better offers. So it's such a tough predicament they're
They're in a tough
in.
spot. A very tough
Yeah,
spot.
and I don't know, without luck or being able to have assets that appeal to a team that has a disgruntled star and a disgruntled star even becoming available, I don't know
Right.
how they get out of this unless they get so extraordinarily lucky with the 20th pick. And obviously it takes
Yeah.
skill too from Adam Simon, Riley, and others to identify the player, but they need to get so lucky because all of the teams winning now have found exceptional players high up in the draft with Cleveland, with Mobley and Garland, and obviously then acquiring Mitchell and DeAndre Hunter, with Boston, with Tatum and Brown. The one exception I would say would be Denver, where Jovic, obviously you didn't get him as a top three
Yeah.
pick. They were smart enough and lucky enough to get a transcendent player later
Right.
on. Giannis picked in the teens. That's the exception, right?
They didn't
Most of
plan on
these
that.
teams that
Right.
are winning now have lost a lot, like
Right.
Oklahoma City, and have gotten all of these high picks. But the Heat will never do that intentionally, and they're probably not going to be bad enough for it to happen unintentionally for them to get several high lottery picks 2 or 3 years in a row.
Maybe they lose Davion Mitchell just because it gets priced out. They unintentionally aren't that good next year. They end up with a 10th lottery seed. They end up with a top. They get lucky and they get a top four pick. I mean, that might just have to be what happens, you know. And it's again, it's not gonna be intentional. It's not their plan, but that might be their situation next year. And one other thing before, because we're running a little long. I want to mention one other thing that we have to keep in mind. I know fans don't care about this, but it is important because it does limit you and how you can do business and how you can build your team. And roster construction is if they're in the tax again this year, that is next season, I'm saying, that will be 3 straight years in the tax. 4 out of 5, you're in the repeater tax, which no team wants to be in. No team wants to be in the repeater tax. That will really impact how the Heat do business if they're in the repeater tax. So I just want to point that out because I think they might be in the tax this year, right? I mean, they might be, they probably will be at this point if they keep Davion especially. Um, that is going to be something to think about because then it's going to really put a lot of pressure on them moving forward, not to be a tax team because they do not want to be a repeater tax team.
Yeah, if you don't count Mitchell at all, he's got a cap hold at the moment, and if you offer him a qualifying offer to make him a restricted free agent, it's 8.7 million on your cap, few million for your first round pick. So without counting Mitchell, the first round pick, they're 11 million below the 188 million dollar luxury tax line now. If you can get Mitchell for 6 million and fit in your draft pick, which
Yeah,
you could, then you would not be a tax team. I'll be shocked if they're a tax team next year. I don't think they want to be one for the
they
precise
can't
reason
be
you
with this
mentioned.
roster.
And there's a
Yeah,
way to avoid it and keep Mitchell. If Mitchell somehow falls to the 6 million, $7 million range, then
that's
you can
hard to
sneak in. If
imagine.
Davion Mitchell's a 10 or $11 million player,
Yeah,
you've got to cut payroll in order to
yeah.
be able to keep him and avoid the tax. So yet another conundrum for them.
That's another conundrum where they're gonna. I mean, they paid the tax this year for this roster, which obviously did not warrant it, right? But they were kind of forced to the Jimmy stuff and the trade. At least they kind of cut the bill by a good amount with the Jimmy trade, but they couldn't get under the tax, so they're technically a tax team 2 years in a row. And yeah, like you said, I think they will do what they can to avoid the tax for a third straight, not because don't want to pay the bill, right? Obviously, that's an incentive that you don't have to have pay that extra money, but because it really puts you on the clock the following years
Right.
where you're going to have to really avoid it to avoid the repeater tax, which again, no team wants to be in because it is really, really damaging.
No doubt. Well, I enjoyed it. Let's do this again after Pat Riley talks, which we
Let's
hope
do
will
it.
be in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think next 2 weeks we should probably hear from Pat, which will be very interesting as usual, to see what he has to say. He hasn't spoken about the Jimmy stuff yet. Obviously, what's the plan for the offseason? How are they going to get out of this tough spot that we've been going over for the last 30 minutes? So it's going to be a really interesting offseason to see what the Heat do. But it's going to be a long offseason too. We have pretty much 5 months until training camp. How about that? So a lot of time to fill. I'm sure we'll be talking again, Barry. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks, Anthony. Enjoyed it.
Of course, and make sure to follow us at Anthony_Chang on Twitter, on X. Barry Jackson, I'm sure you already follow him, but at FLA Sports Buzz, right, Barry? Got that correct?
Indeed.
Okay, perfect. So follow us, visit MiamiHerald.com. We'll have you covered throughout the offseason. Thank you, everybody.